yeah, hopefully everyone learns something new. I found that most people picked up something at the last time that I did it, so hopefully it'll be the same here. So again, a bit more of an introduction to myself. My name's Sean Stride. I'm the founder of dotNET Stoke, and I'm also a senior developer at Bet365. You can find my website with a little bit of a blog, and you can also find me on Twitter, where I'm probably more active than the blog. So if you've got any questions that you don't want to raise here, then just drop us a message via either of them. You can also find us on GitHub and on YouTube, where there's some tutorials, videos, and stuff like that. But, through the talk, we'll go through a bit of an introduction. We'll dip into what WSL actually is, what problems it solves, what the difference between WSL and WSL2 is, and we'll also have a quick look at the new Windows terminal for anyone that's not had any experience or exposure to that yet, which is a really useful tool. So what is WSL? WSL was developed by Microsoft. It's built into Windows 10, and it makes it easier for developers to create and test cross-platform products. The change in direction kind of coincided with dotNET Core, and it allows you to, which also allows you to run products cross-platform, and it allows the two different versions of WSL and WSL2 have slight subtle differences in how they work and what the purpose of both of them were kind of to achieve the same goal, which is why they've stuck to the same name, but they are quite different, really, even though they both try and achieve the same things. But we'll touch on that further into the presentation. When I refer to WSL, I've tried to make it so that this presentation, when it refers to WSL, is speaking about the something that covers both of them, so that it applies to both. If I speak about WSL2, then I will be speaking, or WSL1, and refer to the number, I'll be referring to that instance specifically. So I'll do my best to try that. It's quite difficult. It's easy for just refer to WSL across the board. So what problems does it solve? So if you want to use Vim to edit your files, and you're stuck on a Windows machine, or your Windows machine's your machine of choice, but you like to use Vim, or you want to use grep within Windows, you can also access files from the Linux instance and edit them using Notepad++ or another text editor that you prefer on your Windows machine. You can also, applications that are developed for Linux and Windows, you can now test them from Windows. You can use Visual Studio 2019 or Visual Studio Code, and you can even debug through the code whilst it's running on a fully functional Linux kernel, which is a great thing and really useful. Some languages and technologies are just better supported on some other operating systems. Take Docker or Python, for example. Both are much stronger on Linux than Windows. You could also configure a PostgreSQL database on your Linux WSL instance, and then make calls to that from an application running on Windows. Redis is another example of something that you could use from the on Linux that's primarily based on Linux. So VMs are a segregated space on your machine and don't allow the same free-flowing workflow that you get with WSL. So within WSL, the file systems are shared from both Windows and Linux, and then back again, so you can access either from either side. The processes within a VM are also separated from the host machine, and that means that you have to handle the deployment of code for testing, as well as removing the ability for your your IDE to easily debug them processes that are running. WSL requires a lot less resources, so CPU, memory, storage, all of them are a lot less than if you were running a full virtual machine. So it's also great for devices that don't have a lot of resources available. To access the Linux kernel, it's just as simple as opening a new terminal window. Like I say, we'll touch on the new terminal for anyone not used to that or not experienced with that yet. So we'll have a quick demo of that as well when we get to it to see what that's all about and how you can use that to access the Linux side from a Windows machine. I'll start by giving an overview of each version of WSL, and then we'll dive a bit deeper into some of the lower level details before looking at which version you should be using depending on the scenario that you've got. So WSL1 was more of a compatibility layer so that Linux binaries could be executed on a Windows machine. The Linux syscalls were still made on the Windows kernel after passing through this WSL compatibility layer, WSL1 compatibility layer. And WSL1 was very similar to Cygwin, if anyone's used Cygwin before, as it's trying to provide the Unix tools on Windows, but without the use of a VM. So as you can see from this high level view of WSL1, you can see that all the calls are ultimately executed on the Windows kernel. The difference is, just as we've just discussed, that the calls pass through this compatibility layer, and any binaries that contain a lot of syscalls tend to be quite slow. I'm talking about WSL1 now like it doesn't exist, but it's still a useful tool in some scenarios. So, but these syscalls have to pass through for each one. Any binary that uses a lot of them would have to pass through this compatibility layer a lot. So it could be very slow. There's also other negatives, but again, we'll come to them in a minute. WSL2 is where Microsoft are now primarily focusing the majority of their efforts. The WSL1 is by no means going anywhere, but I think that WSL2 is where a lot more focus will be put now. So the kernel used for executing the Linux calls is open source, and you can find that code here. So this is hosted on GitHub, and it's, like I say, it's open source. If you want to have a look at that, I imagine that it gets quite heavy in there quite quickly. So, but if you're interested in that kind of thing, go take a look. There's a range of distributions, Linux distributions, that are available in the Microsoft Store, which makes the installation process and the really simple. If there's the distro of your choice isn't available on the Microsoft Store, there are some distros. I think CentOS is an example where you can go and find that a WSL version. It's just not available through the store. So I don't know if there's many others that are available like that, but I know CentOS is. And as you'll see from the diagram in a minute, there's no more compatibility layers as the calls are made directly on the Linux kernel. So this means that any new features, as soon as they're released to the kernel, you don't have to wait for some Microsoft employee to go in and translate that call onto the into the WSL1 compatibility layer. It's just available as soon as you've done an update for the kernel. So So yeah, this is the high level view again of WSL2. And you can see that now the Linux binaries are ultimately executed on the Linux kernel, and the Windows binaries are executed on the Windows kernel. The Linux calls are executed in a lightweight utility VM that starts with a very small memory footprint. A lot less memory is used for WSL2 than was for WSL1. And yeah. Right. So the two different scenarios that I was talking about earlier is you will 90% of the time be better off using WSL2 than WSL. But if the only scenario where WSL1 works better is if you can't store the files that you want to use within the Linux distribution. So if you've got, for some reason, you got a code base and you can't check that out using the Linux distribution that you've got on your machine there, and you can only host that on the Windows side, then you will be better off in theory using WSL. There's probably differences. There's probably some instances where that might not be the case, but the file access is what's causing the speed differences. If you want to use the one caveat to that is if you want to use Docker, then the Docker support in WSL2 is 100%, and that's not the case for WSL1. So that is, even if your files are hosted on Windows, you will only really get the full benefits of Docker if you're using WSL2. So right. So Windows Terminal. So I don't know how many people have had experience with Windows Terminal. I'm not going to go into it too much. It's very new, and I think version 1.7 has just been released, or version 1.6 has just been released to I think 1.7 is the new preview version. The tool is brilliant. It allows you to centralize all your command line interfaces. You can have them run split screen. You can have them run commands, run startup, that if you want it to do that kind of thing. And yeah, it's like I say, it's not even a year old, but each version that comes new, if you've installed it from the Microsoft Store, you automatically get the updates when you run an update through there. And there's a multitude of features that get added every single time. So this is the Windows terminal. This is the icon at the bottom, if you can see that. And what this allows me to do is I can run a PowerShell script, I can run a command prompt, I can run a Ubuntu like putty session, I guess. And you can use these, like I said, there's shortcuts for splits, so you can have horizontal, you can have multiple instances, you can have a mixture of PowerShell command prompt and the Ubuntu or whatever WSL distributions you've got installed, and you could have split screens of them. It's a really powerful tool that is definitely going to be more and more prominent and more popular as time goes on, and more features are added. You can add custom backgrounds, custom fonts. There's lots of different personalized features that you can put. You can change alter key bindings. I am actually I have started a YouTube. They've got a YouTube channel, and I'm slowly doing tutorials for the Windows terminal for little things like creating a horizontal split, a vertical split. So if anyone's interested in that, just check us out on YouTube, and or shout out for a link, and I'll share that with you. But yeah, the main reason that I wanted to show this as part of WSL is because you can access your different distributions just straight from inside this tool. So it allows really quick access if you want to install dotNET or dotNET Core even, or you want to run something but you don't want to run it through one of the IDEs and you just want to use the command line, then you've got this available. If you are using your traditional command prompt, you can still get to this screen even without using the terminal. If you just type WSL, if you've got WSL all set up and installed, then it'll take you straight into where the same directory as you were in previously. Right. So let's go back to the slides. Right. So now we'll have a quick delve into the past and the history of WSL. And the talk is based on WSL2. Well, it leans more towards WSL2, and we won't touch on too much history of WSL2 because it's so new that there isn't really any. So it'd be difficult to put WSL2 in the past. It's so much in the present. So, but hopefully this will touch on just how long this has been a Microsoft pipeline, just to show how long they've had focus on this and how it's come to fruition. So Project Astoria was Microsoft's foray into allowing Android applications to run in an emulated environment on Windows mobile devices. That's kind of dead in the water now if the Windows mobile devices just aren't really a thing anymore. But WSL1 was first introduced to everyone in August 2016. So it's not really a new concept anymore, even though WSL2 is different, as we've talked about. They are trying to achieve the same thing. So it's just obvious that Microsoft have had this thought in their minds. I think that they just went about it in slightly the wrong way in the first go, and that's why WSL2's come about. When it was first released, WSL1, there was just a Ubuntu image available. More distributions come later in 2017. So WSL2 used to only be, when it first dropped, available for Windows 10 version 2004 and above. And but according to a duplex report ran in July 2020, which is 3 months after the Windows 10 2004 edition had come out, that version and above had only got a share of 11.6% of Windows 10 users. So it left a massive gap in the amount of people that couldn't utilize this tool. Yeah. So following on from that, now the here and now, as of August 2020, WSL2 was backported to old versions of Windows 10. So Windows 10 versions 1903 and 1909 were now supported, and so anyone that was going back to March 2019 when them versions were first released had now got WSL2 available for them to use. And again, according to duplex, that then now gives a 94.6% of Windows 10 users that this functionality is now available to. So it gives a lot more access into the market than what they had previously. So as it stands at the minute, this is the installation process. It's it's quite complex. It's one of the weaknesses of WSL2. It's something that, as we'll touch on later in the slides, in the future, this process is going to be simplified massively, although it takes away a lot of these longer commands and makes it a lot more simple. So this DISM command is the deployment image and servicing and management tool. And it's the same as if you, and most people have probably used, if you just go Windows features, and you can go and check the Microsoft Windows subsystem for Linux checkbox and the virtual machine platform checkbox. But this is just a way of doing it, an automated mechanism for doing that. So the distributions that are available, there are quite a few that are available through the Microsoft Store. I think there's probably about 10. Like I've said, CentOS have that available, so available from their website, and I'm not sure what other Linux distributions have got that available to you from there. But as you can see, if you just do, I've just done a search in the Microsoft Store here for Linux, you can see that there's Kali Linux, there's various versions of Ubuntu, there's Debian, there's OpenSUSE. There are a few that are paid for as well. I can't see any of them on here, but there are one or two that you can pay for that have been had more of a focus, I guess, on the integration of the Microsoft Linux side. But I don't really see, unless you're using a specialized case, why any of them would be necessary. I've been able to do everything in this with just Ubuntu. So there's also the ability to import the distros from TOR files, which is useful, and I think that we'll come to that in slightly later. We'll touch on that. I think I should have a demo, but my machine's just not powerful for handle that, as I found it last time when I tried to demo that. So we'll talk through that a little bit more when we get to it. Now, I didn't realise that slide was next. So there are multiple commands that you can run to look at your distributions that you've got available. So first is a list in all. So as you can see, I've got Docker Desktop installed, which essentially runs on WSL now, and I've got the Ubuntu, which is my default version. So the importing and exporting is the most useful if you've got especially if you're working in an office type environment and you want to share a distribution that you've got set up and configured. So if you've got an installed dotNET Core and you've got the multiple versions of dotNET Core, because if another weakness, which I'm not gonna have anything to talk about when I get to that slide now, but if you've got a dependency that you need to run the application on your Windows side, such as dotNET Core, or I don't know what else, or if you're using Golang and you're developing on Windows, if you want to run that code on your WSL instance, you also need that dependency installing on that side as well. It can't just use that same version of dotNET Core that you've got installed on your Windows machine. There are some boundaries to WSL. So if you went and installed all of you've got your base Ubuntu image installed or whatever distribution you want to use, and then you go and install the dotNET Core versions, you go and install Golang, there could be multiple other dependencies that you need. You can export that version, and that version can then be shared around to the other members of your team, and it just saves that duplication of that work. I'm not going to run this now because I'm hosting this Zoom call and I've got multiple other things running, set up and running. It takes about, I think it took about 5 minutes last time to run the export, but with all this running on, I think that was without anything, with all this running on, I'm sure it'll take a lot longer. So, but 5 minutes isn't too bad, and on a more powerful machine, it would take even less. You can then import that same distribution. So this is the import command. It's all very simple, and that will import that distribution with that name. And you can call it whatever you want with that from that exported package that you'd created previously. If you've got that installed, then you can then change the defaults. So there's commands for changing the defaults, such as this one. So you can set the defaults, and you just pass in the name that's listed here. And then the last command that I just wanted to talk about is the unregister command. So if you want to remove that custom distribution that you've installed, you just run this command and it'll be removed. The one thing that you've got to be careful of is if your registered version is your default and you remove it, then it will randomly pick one of the other distributions. There's no way of then specifying your default. And I'm just pointing that out because it's caught me out before. So it's something just to be aware of if you ever use that bit of functionality. Right. Oh, sorry. Right, so file system access. So if I am on my Windows machine and I want to access the file system on, sorry, if I'm in my file explorer, which is now decided to freeze, and I want to run, if I want to access my WSL location, then you can run //WSL $, and then the distribution that you've got available and that are up and running become available here. So as I said earlier, if I wanted then to take one of these files and I wanted to open it in Notepad++, if I can find a directory with a file in. So I have the ability here, even though this is a file within Ubuntu, I can then edit this file in Notepad++, and it's editing the live file from Ubuntu. So the other thing that you have access to is within the app data. You can go. No, that link must be all now. You can go and see the package that the WSL instance within here. So can we see? Yeah, there we go. So local state. So this is like the virtual disk image that's actually my Ubuntu instance. So you can back that up, and that's essentially taking a backup of your virtual hard drive that you've got. So that's also quite useful. And then, as I said before, you can do this the opposite way as well. So as you can see from my Ubuntu instance here, I could just as easily go to the root, and you can run all your commands, but I can also go to the mount, and I can then see the different drives that I've got mounted on at this location. So C, D, and F, which are all Windows drives, and I can then go to any of them. and I then have access to my Windows drive, even though I'm running on Linux essentially. I think that's all for that part. Right, so now into the bit more, slightly more interesting bit, in the to see what WSL2 can actually do in the development environments. So I don't know what environment everyone here is using, but this is possible from Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio 2019. Although, as I was mentioning, for anyone that was about at the beginning, Visual Studio 2019 is playing up for me, so I won't be able. I'll start with that one because I can't demo that one in quite the way that I wanted to and what worked previously. So the problem that I've had is I've upgraded Visual Studio today to make sure that I didn't have any problems with this during this demo. And the plugin, it used an extension previously for running WSL. So previously you would come up here and you'd have your different profiles, and you would have a WSL2 profile like this one's set up as now. And what that does is it creates a new profile inside your launch settings, and it specifies the distribution and any environment variables. But the extension isn't available for version 16.9 of Visual Studio anymore, which is what I've got. So this doesn't work anymore. And the reason that the extension doesn't work in this anymore is because, according to Microsoft, this should now be built in. So there should be the ability to debug through your code using WSL2 natively within Visual Studio 2019. So it was from the preview one of that, the 16.9, but 16.9 is now available to the general public. So, but like I say, it's as simple as just picking the profile from the drop down and running it. And I have demoed this previously. If you've got multiple distributions, you get the distributions in this list. And I have previously demoed this using the extension. It's Mads Torgensson who created the extension. So I'm guessing that that's just being built into Visual Studio now, just natively. So I'm hoping that moves along slightly now, because it looks like they've baked it in and the extension doesn't work, and I'm not sure if I've just been caught in the middle. So unfortunately I can't demo that to you, but actually the demo I'm going to do in Visual Studio Code does the same thing, but it's even easier to run the demos in Visual Studio 2019, because it's just a case of switching your profile. So it makes it really smooth and really easy process to be able to run it in either on the Linux kernel or on the Windows kernel, whichever side that you prefer to run it on to test and to debug through. So I apologize about that, but I have got the demos up and running here. So this is just in Visual Studio Code. It's got the extensions, so it's got the remote WSL extension installed, which allows you then to open any folders. It gives you this functionality down here in the bottom left corner, and that allows you then to run your code and debug through your code on either against the Ubuntu image or on your own Windows machine. So if I just run this is a very simple example, just purely because this is all that the demo really needs. It doesn't need to really go into any more differences, because dotNET Core is so cross-platform now. If I just run this demo, I apologize for the speed of this machine. It's not the best. And there you can see that currently this is running on a Windows machine, which I guess is obvious from the fact that you can see my start menu and toolbars at the bottom. But what I can now do once I've got this remote WSL extension installed is I get the ability now from clicking on that green icon in the bottom to reopen the folder in WSL, and that will then shut the previous session down, and it'll open a remote connected distribution, which you can now see is running on the Ubuntu distribution that I've got installed. So when you reopen the folder in WSL, that will just pick your default distribution that we talked about earlier. So if whatever version you want to use, you need to make sure that's set up. And then again, if I run that, and again, like I said previously, any libraries that this needs to run will be installed. If they're the same on both sides, we'll need installing on both. And as you can see, this is now running on a Unix kernel when it processes the OS version that it's running on. So then I can just reopen that back into Windows. So like I said about Visual Studio 2019, this isn't quite as seamless as the Visual Studio one is, because the Visual Studio one, there's no switching between the two. All the editing is done in the same window, and then it's purely on run is the point where it handles all of that processing in the background. So it's a lot smoother here. So I also have an Asp .NET Core application that I've got up and running, and just to demonstrate that this is actually, and as you can see, it's running on my F drive, on a Windows drive, but it's running in Linux. So if I just open that, you can see that loads. Again, I've got that environment OS version command, so you can see that it's actually running using Unix. But the web application loads exactly the same as it would if I was running that in Windows. And again, I could just switch that and switch back and reopen it in Windows, run it again, and I would then get the Windows NT when from that environment OS version. So I won't do that. I've done that once already, but that does work. So let's get back to the slides. Yeah, so Docker Desktop uses Hyper-V for its emulation, and it's one of the reasons why containerization in Windows has been so poorly supported, and it's not been very performant in the past. WSL is now supported, and you can enable that within the Docker Desktop settings, and that uses the WSL2, the Linux kernel, which means that no emulation's required, so you get much better performance now. So yeah, so again, you can use the Visual Studio 2019. The container support in there, to me, isn't as good as the Visual Studio Code stuff. But I don't know why I've got demo. I've not actually got a demo for Docker, so I'll skip that one. So yeah, so here's the weaknesses. I think I've touched on most of these, so this I won't babble on about this for much longer. So yeah, like I said, any dependencies, if you've got multiple distributions and you want to test a dotNET Core application on multiple of them, then you'll have to install that dependency on each of them Linux distributions, which is a bit of a pain. I don't really know if they've got a way around. There'll be a way around that, but it's something that would be nice that if you install that dependency, or to give you the option to install it somewhere, and you only have to install it once on your machine and not multiple times. The number of Linux distributions is fairly small, especially the ones that are obviously available in the Microsoft Store, but I can't really see that changing anytime soon. There's nothing out there at the minute that I've seen that's going to suggesting that that'll change anytime soon. And like I've touched on, the initial installation's a lot more complex, but we'll get into that in a second in the future slides as to how what their plan is to simplify that. Yeah, so a lot of the features that I'm going to talk about now are kind of ready, but they're not available till the 2021 excuse me, H1 Windows release. So if you're on the insiders rings of Windows 10, then you might have some of these features available to you already, but as it stands for the normal everyday user of Windows 10, then features aren't available, so that's why they're still in this future section. So here is the simplified installation steps and the instructions. So WSL install will need to be run as an administrator, but it'll remove the ability, the need to enable certain Windows features to get WSL set up and running. It'll do them commands for you. It'll also make WSL2 your default version for all future Linux distributions that are installed, because as it currently stands, WSL1 version you can change that per distribution, and by default WSL1, when you do the initial steps, is the default unless you set that to be WSL2. WSL list online will display all Linux distributions that are available for you to install at that point in time, which is a very handy feature. It'll remove the need for me to have the Microsoft Store and try and find the different distributions there, because they'll all be available from that one command. So once you've found the distribution that you want, you'll then be able to run the next command, the WSL install D, and then the name, and that command will go and fetch everything that's needed for that and set it up on your machine. And then the last command, WSL update, that'll go away and check if there's any Linux kernel updates that are available, and if there are, then it'll pull them down and get them updated for you, which will save you waiting for for Microsoft to pack them up into one of the Windows 10 updates. So GPU support. So this again, it dropped and got huge fanfare on Twitter and other places, because it's been the #1 most requested feature since WSL was first released. So this allows you to use your graphics, your GPU, to compute heavy workloads as well as the CPU. So and Docker have already got support for this. So this won't really be of any benefit to me because I don't work in these areas, but it'll allow anyone doing machine learning or AI models or anything like that to take advantage of WSL, because it's not really something they can use at the minute without this GPU support. So you'll also have the ability to mount So anyone that dual boots Linux and Windows will now be able to mount a ext4 Linux drive on Windows, and you'll be able to access the files through Windows Explorer or any other mechanism that you use, rather than having to just use partitions like is currently the case. So as I mentioned earlier, the startup commands, so you can have a command, this kind of ties into the commands that you can have the terminal run, but you can now have your WSL, Ubuntu or whatever distribution that you open, run a command from as soon as it opens. I mean, I don't see many huge benefits to that, but it's not something that I've used, but I guess that there are people that use that. You can also use it to log when people access. You could send this command into a file if you wanted to log when people have accessed it. So there are uses for it. It's just not something that I've really used. And then something else that I'm assuming is quite a well-requested feature, and that's Gui support. So the support for this is further down the line. I don't think this is something that will come in the H1 Windows 10 update, but this will give you the ability to actually store Linux applications, UI applications, which isn't something that's currently supported by WSL. And as I say, hopefully it'll be seamless. It's so early that there's not even preview versions of this yet. The only versions of it that you see running is people that are actually working on it that have shared very small snippets of this in action. So, but yeah, hopefully it'll be with us late 2021 or early 2022. But, we'll have to wait and see. I imagine it's quite a bit more complex than the rest of it's been so far. So that kind of brings us to the end of the presentation. I just want to share some people who I follow and blogs and the Microsoft Docs that are all very useful if you want to go a bit deeper into this. So we've got Craig Lowen. He's the program manager at Microsoft who works specifically on Windows subsystem for Linux. So as soon as anything new is available, he's the first person to share it. So he's very good to follow if you're on Twitter. There's Stuart Leeks, who's a software engineer at Microsoft, and he's got a brilliant book that's published by Pact, and that's called WSL2, and it's a really good book. It's got lots of tips and tricks for Windows Terminal, as well as going into WSL and what that can be used for. You've got Kayla Cinnamon. She's the program manager at Microsoft who works specifically on the new Windows Terminal. So if you're more interested in that than WSL, then she's like Craig. She's the first to drop any new releases. We've got Unix Tech, who's Nuno DeCormo, and he's a Docker captain. He's Microsoft MVP. Definite WSL specialist. He gets around. He does quite a few different things in the community, so he's very good for follow as well. And then there's Hayden Barnes, and him and Nuno are the two big names in WSL really. And he worked at Ubuntu, focusing specifically. Worked at Canonical, working on Ubuntu, but focused on the WSL integration side. So the blogs, again, Stuart Leeks is in there, and wsl.dev is Nuno's blog. I think he runs with someone else, but again, both great sources of information. And then the Microsoft Docs, which is a great starting place. They're very useful. which makes a change for some Microsoft docs. So, and that's it, unless anyone's got any questions or anything. I know that the chat's had a few things flashing, but I haven't had a chance to look at them yet, so I don't know if there's anything related to the group or if the no questions in the chat, all just introductory stuff.
You mentioned you had a YouTube before, which went through some of this WSL stuff. Will you be able to send me that link, please?
Yeah, I'll post in the chat now. Just let me find it. So the YouTube that I've got is focused on the Windows terminal tips and tricks, and to be honest, there's only one video on there at the minute. There's another one that will be going on tomorrow, but they're just quite small, quick tutorial videos for the different keyboard shortcuts and the different bits of features that are available. So, but I'll just dig that out now. Pop that in the chat.
Yeah, got it. Cheers, Sean.
Actually, let me just.
Hey, Sean.
Hi, Neil, you all right?
Yeah, long time.
I know, yeah, it isn't it?
Could be.
How are you?
Not bad, mate. Not bad. Looking a bit rough because it's my first day off for a bit today, so I'm just chilled out. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a self thing as well. So I've just done write up on my blog about. I've been working with a team who needed Windows and Unix as well. So I've done a write up on my blog on how to quickly get set up with WS2 largely automated. I can share it, but it feels a bit braggy. But
no, I'm glad you've joined actually, because I got a question about that. But your blog hasn't got any way of submitting a comment or anything, so I didn't know how to get in touch with you.
There's a good reason for that, Sean. That it's a static site. It's Jamstack, and I don't really have the time. So you can how many posts, but I'd be happy for you to share it. And as I rolled off the project yesterday, the MOJ are talking about putting it in as a standard for their team. So if it helps out anybody else.
You share it in the chat, Neil, because I read through that. I've been meaning to write a blog post exactly the same for ages. I just haven't got round to it. So I've read through that blog post and it was really a good write up. My question was, have you used Winget yet?
No. So
do you know of Winget though? Because I saw that you'd used Chocolatey, and I've recently rebuilt my machine just from Winget, but so I just wondered what the benefits of using that were.
I'd be interested in Winget, but it's but my issue is I'd already got it working in Chocolatey anyway.
Yeah.
And Winget is still pre-release.
Right. So if you're using it in businesses, then it's not. Yeah.
So I would love that to work, because then that would help. And also WSL2, I think they've got in preview now that you'll be able to automate the install, because in that post I did, you have to do it manually, which is a bit of a pain. But I believe they've got WSL. You'll be able to pass it a switch that goes a WSL install.
yeah, that is what, yeah, that'll be in the next
Yeah.
version. So
Yeah. Which will help as well. But I know that a few people have followed my instructions, and they're like, so I can quote one of them. He said, "This is just insane." He said, "The time saved is just incredible." But
yeah,
I've been
yeah,
doing it for a while, so yeah.
yeah. I mean, I've been on WSL2 now since it come out. I've only done this presentation twice, but I've done this. I did a talk on WSL2 prior to this, like a lightning talk when it had first come out, and the amount of people that I talk to now still that just have never heard of WSL, and WSL2 is quite a lot, and it's a really useful tool. I still don't use it at work, to be honest. So we're in the process again. It's set up now. So again, because we write applications that run on Linux servers, but we don't test them until they're deployed, essentially. Like, and it's
So I know nobody except you, Sean, probably knows me on this call, but I'm in a situation where, in consultancy, where I can drop from project to project pretty quickly. So having things like Teams that just works, and being able to go into sort of SharePoint in Linux, it was excruciating. But then we're writing software that runs in Unix, and the tooling on Windows just doesn't work. So, or makes it extremely hard. But this just makes it so easy now. I can jump onto ad hoc meetings in sort of Teams, and I've got Office that just works. So
yeah,
it's the dream for me. It really is.
Yeah, you've got all the benefits and not really any of the downsides, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that I could script most of it up means that I can clean down a laptop and I can be up and away in hours.
Yeah.
Instead of days of like going, oh, you've got to need to change this setting, that setting. So yeah, I'm absolutely loving it. And don't get me wrong, at the, I think 4 or 5 months ago at work, somebody said that'll never work. I said, but it's already working. I don't get it. So yeah.
Yeah.
Big fun. All I do miss though is the one thing that you've just talked about is some GUI applications. So, for example, one of the things that I would really love to work is IntelliJ on
Right. Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
So I'll be glad when that comes out, but you can work around that.
Yeah. I've seen one or two workarounds that are available, but I'm not sure it's going to be. I'm assuming that hopefully the actual built-in functionality will be a lot more smoother and easier than setting up any alternative. So
yeah, make it slick, make it easy. Yeah. Anyway, I'll just shut up. Nice to see you, mate.
Yeah, and you, Neil, and you. How is everything? Are you still down where you moved to from up here?
Yeah, I'm in Kent.
Yeah.
Just finished a project for the Ministry of Justice. So yeah, but thinking about moving back up north.
How are you?
Yeah.
But
we can talk about that off you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you want. But,
yeah, you'll have to drop me a message, Neil, or something, and it'll be nice to catch up. So, like I say, I tried to find a way of getting in touch with you before, but I couldn't find any way of getting in touch. So,
yeah, okay, right. By design.
Yeah. Oh, I've collared you now, so
yeah.
Has anyone else got any questions for me or for Neil now that he's done his self-promotion? No, I think I'll stop sharing and stop the recording now.